You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
All right, Brendan, we're live on Twitter Spaces today, recording the podcast for the first time. Why Twitter Spaces, Brendan? That's my first question for you. Why are we doing Twitter Spaces?
I don't know.
Trying something different.
So we're live, right? We're basically this is our sort of medium to do the podcast live, right? So we're recording it like normal. Recording it for YouTube with the video, uploading to all pod platforms. So everything that we usually do, but at the same time, we now have our phone set up on Twitter Spaces and are doing this entire thing live. I just thought it'd be a cool experience for people that were maybe around while we were recording. They could listen to the episode early, hear us as we go through our normal episode stuff with all of our notes, see if we make mistakes, etc., etc. It just seems like there's no reason to not be doing it. Maybe at the end of this week, we'll look at YouTube and podcast conversions and see if it negatively affects it or if people enjoyed it, etc., etc. But yeah, just try it out, see if it works.
Right. Well, we can't have an argument mid podcast then, because how can I edit it out if everyone's listening to it on Twitter Spaces? No. Big hello to everyone on Twitter Spaces. Thanks for joining us, Brendan. This is episode 86 of Arsenal Pass. And Brendan, you want to talk today about how to win a ProQuest. Have you won a ProQuest before, Brendan?
So I haven't won I top 8 at ProQuest, but back when Road to Nationals were the premier competitive event, I won 5 in a row. I haven't played a ProQuest season. I played one ProQuest.
I know you haven't played any ProQuests. I think you've played 2 or 3 max.
Yes, but when I played Road to Nationals, they were definitely the equivalents of ProQuest. Those didn't exist yet. So, I do have some accolades in the ProQuest in the ProQuest-esque tournament.
Hey, well, you won a PTI event not too long ago, so I'm sure you can give some insight based on that. So we are going to talk about that today on episode 86 of Arsenal Pass. As I say, stitching up Brendan already, one of my favorite things to do. Want to ask you, actually I already asked you, how was your week in Flesh and Blood? You said you haven't really been playing Flesh and Blood. What have you been doing? Anything else? Have you been playing any other games? Marvel Snap, maybe?
Yeah. Unfortunately, a little bit of Marvel Snap.
Yeah,
Trying to just hit Infinite by the end of the month, by the end of the season, which it's honestly been a grind. But, I want that card back, and I'm just motivated by in-game items like that, I guess. Outside of that, I've been exercising a lot because preparing for the marathon, so I stepped up. In the past 2 weeks, I stepped up from about a 3-mile run every day to now 6 to 10 miles every single day. Maybe take 2 days off. It depends how my body's feeling. So that's pretty intense, to be honest, but I have to do that because I don't really have a lot of time to prepare for said marathon. And then, like we talked about in the Patreon podcast yesterday, I watched a movie in theaters, which is really unusual for me. I saw Glass Onion. It was great. Highly recommend it. What about you, Hayden?
I've actually been playing some Flesh and Blood. I've been attending a couple of armories. It's been really cool. It's been really enjoyable to get back and play some armories. I was looking at I think I already said this anecdote maybe, but I was looking at my Fab TCG, recent history page before, sort of after Worlds, and it was I could see the last 2 PTs on my first page. I just hadn't had the opportunity to play any armories. It's just been life and getting ready for events. So November, December, bit of downtime, traditional Flesh and Blood off-season, as we can now call it. Getting out to play some armories, which has been awesome. So went to a CC armory on Monday night, played a bit of Dash, which I'll talk about later in the pod once we talk about sort of approaching ProQuest Season 3 and this meta and what we're expecting stuff to look like, because we did also there was a PTI event on Sunday. Guess we're kind of rolling a bit into the news now, but there was a PTI event and Battle Hardened Hong Kong that took place over the weekend. Both won by Dash. So Battle Hardened Blitz and PTI event, which is pretty cool. Dash there's some new cards, some new toys to play with, which we did talk about. Yeah, which we did talk about in the podcast last week. The first week. So 2 weeks ago, we broke down over the last 2 weeks our Dynasty sort of review, I guess, or how we think it's going to impact Constructed, and we talked a lot about Dash in that first part of it, part 1. I think it's episode 84. And obviously, we're already seeing that come to the forefront with Dash really putting on display. Also, one, of course, the Battle Hardened, the SCG Battle Hardened a couple of weeks ago as well, the first week of Dynasty release. So awesome to see. And then we've got Singapore this coming weekend, which is coming up. So more Flesh and Blood on the way. And then I think I want to say, is that it for the year? Because then January is ProQuest Season 3, which is coming up. And then we've got Battle Hardened Leeds and Belgium, I think it's Antwerp as well, coming up. So people get some downtime, go play some armories like I'm doing. You can, go get some. I want to do some drafts, actually. I really want to revisit December, trying to get some groups together and do some things like Monarch draft, Welcome to Wraith draft. Probably not Arcane Rising draft.
I thought you were like, damn, I just really miss Uprising drafts. I was like,
maybe I do.
It's not been that long yet. I mean, maybe you do. You did have a pretty good record at the World Championships, so
it helps being only one Icelander in a pod. So, otherwise in the news, we've actually, as we were recording, Brendan, I just had a message in a couple of hours. Our last game of the Blitz Beatdown series, this Gauntlet series that we're doing for Legend Story Studios up on fabtcg.com, is going up. Now all 4 games will be up. There's deck techs for the decks we played. First 2 Blitz games are without Legendaries and Fables, and the deck techs represent that. And then the games that have gone up this week, they I want to say it's Dash versus Prism, and what else did we play? I played Arachne in one of the games. I think that's the game going up today. And you were playing
Rhinar.
Yeah. Brendan got on the Rhinar train. So those games are up now. Although if you're listening live on Twitter Spaces, I think the last game is going up in a couple of hours with deck techs.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy playing Blitz? Did you enjoy playing, aside from our technical difficulties, did you enjoy playing some Blitz and trying out some of these new cards? Because we played with a lot of new cards over these 4 games.
I did. So I think from a casual standpoint, and those games were, a bit more on the casual side, because we got to just build new decks from Dynasty cards, experiment with the new cards and new archetypes. I had a lot of fun. I think Blitz is a great way to sort of, dip your toes in a Dynasty, right? You got to mess around with a Brute, a Wizard, a Ninja, and an Illusionist, and see all the sweet new things that I could I could do with some of the cards. My Icelander deck probably didn't look too much different than it did before, and my Prism deck, I think that some of the Dynasty cards I put in there were actively just worse. But outside of that, it was fun. It was a good introduction to Dynasty for me, and I did enjoy it. I think through the video series, I got to play some heroes I wouldn't usually play, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what people are thinking so far of Dynasty as a whole as a set. If you're on YouTube, actually, even if you're on Twitter Spaces, drop us a comment and let us know what you're thinking about the set so far. I've been really enjoying. I think the kind of main takeaway so far for people is that it's helped a lot of classes come up. Maybe not the main 4 heroes, with Ultim, Fi, Icelander, Briar. Maybe they've gotten the least, you would say, or you could say. But a lot of these other things, Dash, we just talked about, Azalea, you've got Arachne as a new hero. There's a lot of things that are new and feel competitive. So I think we're going to see it flesh out as we head towards the ProQuest season. Is Arachne really real? Is it viable? Are these upgrades to Azalea enough to make it tier 2, sort of tier 1.5? Or, are we going to see the old favorites once people start, they get off all the new toys and they start going back to maybe trying to just understand what the best of the best is? Are we just going to see these old heroes still stand on top? It's going to be really interesting. So far, I think you can already say Dash is going to be competitive. There's no way you're saying that's just a fad for the first sort of 4 weeks of Dynasty. It's powerful. But it gets fatigued now. Well, we can talk about that.
We'll break into that eventually. Yeah. So what you mentioned there too, you're like, the top 4 heroes didn't really get as much support. Best case scenario, to be honest, that's exactly what we needed. Letting some of these other heroes that have maybe not had their time in the spotlight get some more tools to work with. I think that's great, right? I don't know if it was 100% intentional. I think it was a bit of serendipity there that the top meta decks maybe didn't get as many upgrades, but I think it's great because I look back at a set like Everfest where the freaking Runeblade cards and the Illusionist cards, the classes that were already good got the powerful cards. So I think that this is a better scenario.
Yeah. With that said, Brendan, should we jump into a Command and Cookout question this week before we get into the main topic of the pod?
Yeah, what do you have for us?
Great question. I do have a Command and Cookout question. I just need to flick to it. All right, we got a question from Fancy from the Arsenal Pass Patreon Discord asking, Brendan sometimes alludes to people learning how to play against Dorinthia. This is actually an older question, but I thought it's super relevant right now. Making hero fundamentally worse. How do you play against Dorinthia? Are there other heroes that you think are essentially a knowledge check in this way, and once you figure out how you correctly play into it, get much less scary? I think this question is really relevant because Dorinthia, Brendan, just got a ton of, a reasonable amount of upgrades from this new set. There's a lot of different ways you can build it, but there's also just some cards that are really interesting. Puncture is one that comes to mind. But yeah, back to this question. How do you play against Dorinthia, Brendan? And is there any other heroes like this that are a knowledge check?
I want to start off by addressing the elephant in the room, and that's that that quote, verbatim quote, I would assume, of me.
Definitely is.
It says that accuses me of using the word fundamentally. So first off, doesn't sound like me at all. But yeah, there's actually a lot of heroes that are like that. I think Dorinthia is just sort of the big bully from the old days, right? From Welcome to Wraith, that was the deck that if you didn't know what you were doing, you would be heavily punished. And we started to, it felt like as we got, that meta matured a bit more. People also put more defense reactions in their deck, but it felt like that deck was much more tame. Where in the beginning, like I remember the first couple months of Welcome to Wraith constructed, Dorinthia was like the freaking powerhouse. Nothing could, I was in the US, by the way, so very small meta there, but like Dorinthia's a freaking powerhouse in CC, nothing could go close, etc, etc, etc. And that lasted for like a month or two, and then there was like this Fatigue Bravo list that came out, and so on and so forth. Decks equalized, decks equalized a bit, and Dorinthia turned out it was a good deck, but it wasn't overpowered. But yeah, I think Dorinthia definitely is a deck where if you don't know what you're doing, because of the way Dawnblade works and some of the card suite does, is like there is this sort of snowball advantage. So it's like as soon as you make one mistake, it feels like you pay for that for the entire game, and you have to prioritize and play your defense reactions in the correct way in order to play around that. Another hero that I think is a great example of that is actually Kano. Like, Kano is probably even more punishing if you don't know what that deck is trying to do, especially when it comes to when should I pitch for Arcane Barrier, when should I use my Spell Void, right? Like popping your Spell Void on like an early Lessons in Lava, absolutely not correct, like 99% of the time. How safe am I overextending into the Kano right now? How likely are they to have it? Like, I think that Kano is a deck that almost is somewhat predicated on punishing its opponents based on their lack of knowledge of how the deck works.
Yep. People just clicking those timers where 10 minutes and Brendan's already talked about the strength of Kano, so that's a tick mark for your the Taylor Morrow drinking game, as I like to call it. So Fancy was asking about like how you play against. I completely agree about the Dorinthia piece, by the way, right? Like, I remember seeing all these like 50-0 my local armory Dorinthia deck, like when Welcome to Wraith first came out, because it was just people were just running over people, and a big part of that is the decision trees you go down when you play against Dorinthia. You get the biggest edge against that by knowing what your opponent can do in any given situation. So, they pitch a blue, play a Warrior's Valor. Now they're down to 2 cards in hand, maybe 1 card in arsenal, and they come in with their Dawnblade. What are the options they can have here? There's so many things, and as sets of release, we've had things like Twinning Blade, which have just increased those options. You've had Spoils of War to give natural go again. It's cheaper than Driving Blade. You've had all these options that Dorinthia's kind of expanded upon. So it is a hero that's difficult to play against. And I think we saw this national season, sort of ProQuest, PT2, national season. We saw some people doing really well with Dorinthia because it's strong. First of all, like, Dorinthia is not a Bolton / Levia tier hero. I think like Dorinthia was powerful, struggled into Prism, but against other aggro decks, especially once Glistening Steelblade was printed, like that was a really powerful thing you could do. It still is now. But yeah, there is definitely a bit of a knowledge check there, like you talk about. So how you play into it, well, you need to really know what your opponent can or could do. So, a lot of graveyard checking is pretty relevant. You'll see people do that against Dorinthia to see what attack reactions have already been played. Am I playing around a Steelblade, Singing Steelblade? Like, that's one of the hardest cards to play around. Is it worth playing around in this situation? Am I playing around an Iron Song response? Am I playing around double Alpha Blood? Alpha Blood and say Stroke of Foresight. Like, what are you need to work out the cards you're playing around. And there's also different Dorinthia builds. We've seen Dorinthia builds be more focused on non-attack actions rather, versus attack reactions, and vice versa, and a bit of a sort of a melding of the both. So I think knowledge of what your opponent's trying to do, the cards they could be playing, and just getting reps in is kind of the best way, because often it's correct to just not block Dawnblade on the first attack. Like, that is often a very correct thing. They play Spoils of War, come in for 5. Often the correct decision is don't block, because now on their second attack, they've used an extra resource. The options they have to respond to your defense on the second attack is limited. So using your life total is a bit of a resource for that.
And when we talk about the hero getting worse as the meta sort of matures and realizes that Dorinthia is going to be a player in that meta, it's basically just people making less mistakes against the deck. That's a deck that if your opponent makes a mistake against you, the advantage bar that you get from that can be quite drastic, where with other heroes sometimes it's, I don't know if it's less, but it's maybe a bit less on the nose, right? It's a bit more subtle. With Dorinthia, it's like boom, there's a counter on Dawnblade, and like holy crap, now I'm facing down a potential another Singing Steelblade, or there's the bolters are still there, and there could be another freaking counter or something like that. So it just, when we say like Dorinthia gets worse into these metas, we just means that, naturally your opponents should start to make less mistakes as they become more accustomed to the deck collectively.
I think, yeah, I partially agree with that. I think the other part is you will see people start to respond with playing more defense reactions in the deck. If something like Dorinthia is big in the meta, that is an option. It's like you talked about Cannon before. It's like people packing Nelrune. It's like people playing defense reactions. The problem is that you need to know how to use those defense reactions, how you want to hold cards in Arsenal, and when you actually want to use your defense reactions versus just taking damage and allowing maybe even a counter to get on something. There's a lot of decision trees, which I really like. I really like playing into Dorinthia. I hate playing the hero. Definitely one of my least favorite heroes to play, but I really enjoy playing into the hero for that reason. The other thing I wanted to just respond to Fancy asked about other knowledge checks. I think Bolton is, if you don't understand how the Bolton combo works, that is, like you say, that is a knowledge check. You can just get blown out immediately, even if you could stop the combo. If you don't know how to with the way you defend on the first few attacks, that could see you getting blown out. You talked about Kano already. I think, yeah, Katsu can be with like where you should block for Mask of Momentum triggers and for like Mugenshi lines and things like that. I think Ranger can be to an extent as well, particularly Lexi. I think we saw in the early days. How do you actually defend against on-hit effects like Chilling Ice Vein and Frostbolt, things like not Frostbolt. I'm so bad with the Ice Ranger card names.
The Ice Ranger. I mean, I don't know which one you're trying to fish for in the ether there.
The one that gives you a Frostbite.
Yeah. So the Ice Ranger card that gives you a Frostbite.
Oh, sorry. I thought you knew the answer and you were about to tell me. Okay. Anyway,
no, it's not coming to. It's not
anyway.
Coming to
That's another one of those kind of checks, I think. So. Great question from Fancy there. I think we're going to see, just to go back on Dorinthia, I think Dorinthia is strong. I think it's a viable option for the upcoming ProQuest season, and I think we've already seen it show up a little bit. I want to say maybe we've seen one in these PTI events. A lot of options now. Glistening Steelblade is a very real card, and there's a lot of different ways you can build the deck now. I'm interested to see if anyone comes up with the kind of dual-wielding Dorinthia at all. I tried it in Blitz. It seems reasonable. I think maybe I should have been playing attack actions in my deck to take advantage of that. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways now you can build Dorinthia. Hero's definitely not bad.
You let me down there. I really wanted to take my bingo card for Unified Decree, but you went the Sabres route.
I know. Sorry, I apologize.
All right. Yep. So if you do want to submit a question to the Commander Cookout, potentially get it read up on the pod, there's of course the Arsenal Pass Discord, or you can go ahead and shoot an email to us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. All right, let's go ahead and head into the main topic of the pod, how to win ProQuest, something that, as Hayden pointed out, I've never done. Now, I mean, Hayden and I both have had success in sort of ProQuest S. It's basically the regional tournament circuit, right? The regional tournaments that are the most competitive. It used to be Road to Nationals. At one point, to be honest, it was Skirmish. But now they're mostly referred to as ProQuest, right? And they probably will be in perpetuity. So let's just start off real quick. A lot of people listening probably know what ProQuest is, but in case you don't, ProQuests are the events where you get invites to the Pro Tour. That's the main thing, right? And we have one upcoming here from the 14th to 29th of January, 2023. And that will give you potentially an invite to Pro Tour number 3. There is a random gold drop foil card to first place. That's where that PTI goes as well. And then first through 8th place get some sleeves and like a limited edition Soraya, and then there's like some resource tokens or something like that, right? So you're trying to win basically, and this is your path to become a quote unquote professional player in Flesh and Blood, or at least the most clear path. There's also things like XP, etc., etc. So
PTIs, etc. Because just want to make the distinction that winning a ProQuest doesn't give you a PTI; it gives you an invite to that Pro Tour. So
yeah,
ProQuest Season 3 is to qualify you for the first Pro Tour of 2023. Where that is, couldn't tell you. Apparently it's in North America, but we'll find out soon. I assume before the ProQuest season starts, we will definitely have confirmed date and location. But yeah, just want to make that clear that like a PTI is these PTI events. It's the Battle Hardens. It's topping a certain number at a Pro Tour. So generally top 32 gets you a PTI, and those can be used and redeemed for anything. But of course, for a ProQuest season, it's a feeder event directly for that ProQuest. You can't bank them.
Yeah. I wonder if they're ever going to change the because like it's Pro Tour in because it does get a little confusing, right? You have like the big boy PTIs that you can like hold on forever and like sell them, and then there's like these other ones that are for specific events. But I digress. Like we said, they're local and regional tournaments, right? They're going to be held at your local game store. So if you want to figure out where those are and how to attend, just go to the event locator on fabtcg.com. And just a little info about why the PTI is important. Like Hayden said, this gives you access to Pro Tour number 3 and gets you on this sort of pro circuit, right? So let's go into step 1.
Well, I just want to say, this ProQuest season is class constructed, by the way.
Yep. It is class constructed, thank God. I will miss Uprising Draft, but it is a class constructed. So my step 1 for me is understanding the meta. And I think that understanding the meta is a critical component to winning pretty much any Fab tournament above an Armory, and debatably even kind of important for winning Armories. But I think that you start with identifying the macro, right? Do I expect most players to be on aggro, control, or mid-range? Like, what is the general feel? Like, sometimes, and this has sort of been what a lot of the class constructed metas have looked like in Flesh and Blood, especially post Monarch and pre Prism ban. They were just heavily aggro dominated, right? So it was hard to find an excuse to play a mid range deck because the aggro decks were so linear, so aggressive, and your ability to set up and try to outvalue the opponent was usually eclipsed by just raw damage. So often you saw these two polar sides of the meta, right? Where you saw the hyper aggressive decks and then you saw the hyper control decks, the things like the old hymns or the fatigue prisms, etc., etc. So identifying sort of the macro archetypes that are being played. And then of course we start to narrow that down. So where I love to start is just what is the narrative for the current quote unquote best deck? And if you listen to the beginning of this pod, it kind of sounds like it's Dash, right? So if I'm going into my first ProQuest, I am bringing a deck that's going to be prepared for Dash, right? If I could also be playing Dash, and there's definitely an argument to playing the best deck, but I think it's important to pay attention to whether it's Twitter, Discord, or just your at your local Armory. Like, what do people think is like overpowered? What are they complaining about? Because that's what you should really be trying to beat, right? And that's what you should expect, especially on something like the first tournament of the ProQuest season.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Hayden. You're good.
I was just going to say, in terms of you talking about narrative and understanding the meta, it's going to change locally as well, I think, depending on your region. You talked about this being the regional sort of circuit of Flesh and Blood, which it is. And, generally if you're playing ProQuest, you're probably playing it within a certain radius. It could be, I know a lot of people will go, I'll commit to everything that's within a 4-hour drive of my house, for instance, and then they might play 3 sort of ProQuest because of that. And you're probably going to have a lot of players within that vicinity doing the same thing. So you're going to see the same players most weeks, and you're going to see similar metas, and you're going to see that local shift be fairly local, I'd say. It will often take the form of, like you say, the kind of narratives you're talking about. So if everyone in the sort of Flesh and Blood community is talking about Dash being the deck right now, people are forgetting about Icelander, whatever it is. What does that mean for your meta? Are you actually hearing different things at a local level? It's like, okay, my store just has a lot of like Fi guys, Fi guys, girls, people that play Fi. What does that mean for you? So I do think there's a narrative there, but then it's also, like you say, that the macro side of it is like starts to come in and narrow, and hope I haven't taken away from what you were about to say, but
I mean, Five Guys just sounds like a fast food restaurant. But,
it's a Flesh and Blood. It's in the world of Wraith. You hit to Five Guys and you get yourself some fires and frozen Icelander drink. I don't know.
Yeah. So as we drill down to that, you end up with like, what is the sort of hero representation look like? What do I expect, right? And this is pretty important. So if we look back at the Pro Tour 2 meta, Icelander was potentially like a pretty good pick, right? It had the Icelanders at the time thought it had a good matchup into Briar and a pretty great matchup into Oldhim, but Prism was still around and it had a straight up auto loss to Prism. The argument would be is that Prism was not a very viable deck in Pro Tour number 2 because of the perceived bad matchup against Briar. Nevertheless, we saw what we've seen a million times, and that's that people freaking bring Prism when they can bring Prism, and a bunch showed up. So maybe Icelander wasn't the best pick, even though it was a fundamentally powerful deck, because there was this looming matchup of a quote unquote auto loss that was going to be a significant part of the meta. So in my opinion, I would argue that Icelander was probably not the best pick for Pro Tour number 2, even though the deck was very, very powerful. And sort of lastly, when it comes to understanding the meta, I want to circle back up to something we touched on really quickly, which is, should you just be playing the best deck? Well, I find myself defaulting to the best tech pretty often, and I think that I'm able to do that because I often have enough time and resources to be practiced on most of the meta decks, right? And often the best deck has that sort of reputation and narrative for a reason, right? Especially if you see it performing week to week to week. And it's an absolutely legitimate strategy to play that deck. And even if you're playing mirrors and you don't feel like you have too much of an edge, you can totally take down a tournament with it. And it can occasionally be the path of least resistance than trying to, break the meta wide open with something new. A little anecdote that I have from this, and Hayden, of course, shares, and this is Pro Tour number 2. Hayden and I, while I think we're kind of known for just playing the best deck and playing meta decks, it's not what we actually like to do. We always are looking to find sort of like a disruptive deck, right? Like a deck that's surprising, that people aren't suspecting, that we can catch people off guard, exploit people's sort of limited sideboards, and have game plans that are not sort of public knowledge at that point. But in Pro Tour number 2, we played Briar. And although our list was a bit different, it was a pretty standard Briar list, and we played it into the Briar meta. And this came down to is like through all of our testing, through all of our hard work, we just couldn't get away from Briar, and we decided that although that was the deck that was being targeted by all the other players, that was the deck that was being played by the other players that weren't targeting it, and we couldn't get that much of an edge, it still just gave us the best chance of winning the tournament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this idea of the best deck, I think when you talk about that, you're talking about public perception, right? Like, what is back to that narrative thing? What is the narrative of the best deck? And in new metas, so ProQuest Season 3 is going to be interesting because it's going to be a fairly fresh meta, and I think we're going to see the narrative of the best deck develop over the 3 weeks of the season itself. I think heading into week 1, there'll be the decks to beat. There'll be the ones that people are talking about. We're a month out now, so it could be Dash, could be Icelander, could be Fi, could be any of these decks, but you'll definitely have some information heading into at least week 1. The interesting thing that happens is, like I say, if you're going to a ProQuest in week 1, week 2, week 3, you're going to have your more micro meta, your local meta, but there is going to be some things that happen over the top. And because of things like Talishar, because of community, discourse, things are starting to evolve a little bit quicker. And I wouldn't be surprised to see ProQuest Season 3 have at least some evolutionary jumps week to week on the meta you see. You go week 1, it's like 30% of people play Dash, maybe as an example, and people have got the deck to beat it. I don't know exactly. Maybe Icelander, right? Maybe Icelander is really good until people realize how good Icelander still is. And then it's like, okay, next week we shift over and it's like 5 to 10% have shifted off Dash and have gone to another aggro deck, or 5% have just gone to now what may be the best deck in the form of Icelander. So I think we'll see this shift. And one thing I did want to sort of give, something that I've done a lot in the past, I know some others in testing groups have been a part of, a big fan of this as well, is trying to break down what the meta shifts look like and these narratives look like in terms of the expected metagame percentage. So you can do this for a macro level. It's a lot harder to do something like this for a calling, but to do this for like a pro tour where you can be a bit more short of like generally people playing Eto decks or landing on certain things. You can also do this for your ProQuest meta where you know a bit more information, like solid information about what people will play. But you can do this on pen and paper, you can do this on Excel, however you want to do it. You can go and start to give percentage points to what you think people are going to shop within the meta. You can assign Dash 30%, Icelander 20%, whatever you think it's going to be. And then based on the decks that you know that you play, you can actually go and give yourself a bit of a win percentage, so to speak, like how confident you are into these. You can do this with numerical, you can do this with sort of written feelings. I feel good into this matchup, I feel only okay into this matchup, whatever it is. And then you can go and actually weight the metagame based on what you know. So, maybe I've got a deck that's good into Dash and Icelander, but is like a dog to Fi. Maybe that's a great week 1 pick. All of a sudden, Fi rises in week 2, and I know from just looking at my percentage points I expect people to take and what I know this matchup's like, maybe now this deck that's bad to Fire is not a good choice. I really recommend, like, if you just have a bit of time, just like even with a pen and paper, just sitting down and just writing this out. It helps you think through the thought process, I think, and will give you some solid sort of answers to why you should or shouldn't play a deck. Because a lot of people will go, well, I think I should play this deck because it's maybe the best deck. Oh, I think it's the best choice. But often when I say, like, why is it the best choice, people can't articulate why that is. They just go, well, I thought people would play this deck. But then what about the other 2 or 3 decks that are near the top? Oh, yeah, I didn't really think about those. They're an okay matchup. But maybe there's another deck that you play. Maybe you play Viscerai or something and you have a good matchup into 2 of those 3, and that could have been a better option. Like, I think you can just give yourself a bit more of a it just gives you an edge. It just gives you this understanding, and you can actually put some data and thought behind it a bit more.
Yeah, with ProQuest season being a multi-week sort of tournament set, you should absolutely expect the meta to be dynamic and be switching week to week. And Legend Story Studios will often publish articles kind of detailing the meta and how it's shifting, and it's a great resource. But obviously, look at it through the lens of your local meta, because your local meta might behave atypically compared to sort of the macro meta across the world. And I want to cap off the understanding the meta section by saying that while it's important to understand the meta, it's arguably more important that you should just play whatever hero you're comfortable on, especially in the current class constructed meta, from what I understand, right? And even if we want to rewind pre-Dynasty, while Icelander and, Oldhim, some of these decks were very powerful, Briar, it felt like a meta where you could get away with playing the deck that you were good at, right? The deck that you were comfortable with. We saw a lot of specialists see a lot of success, and I do believe that Flesh and Blood is still in that same place. It likely will always be in that place unless there is something that is so fundamentally broken, like a Starvo or something that just shuts down your sort of pet deck's ability to play the game, right? Just from a fundamental basis.
Get that word in there. Yeah, no. I definitely don't disagree. I think it's a good point. And we saw that, right? We saw two Reinars make top 8 at the calling in San Jose and be won by Chandler Toe playing Reinar, which is not something that people would have had on their scorecard, I'm sure, on their brackets. But one thing that Chandler did particularly well, right, winning that event, is that, yes, he played the hero that he's very, very familiar with, but Chandler also understood the metagame and made deck choice, card choice decisions based on that, had a Reinar deck that was tuned to that meta. Didn't just pick up the same Reinar list that they had been playing for 6 months or whatever and just run with it. They still understood the meta, what they expected to play against, had the game plans, and had the tweaked deck to go into that meta game.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to quickly run through an example of the deck that I would plan to play the first week of ProQuest, which is Kano, right?
Rock Reinar.
So, yeah, Rock Reinar. Yeah, close. You almost took the words out of my mouth there. Yeah, so Kano, great into some metas and really painful into others. Kano's a powerful deck, but it feels like the meta itself can abuse Kano, right? It's less Kano abusing the meta, and I feel like the meta is really abusing Kano, right? How much spell void are we dealing with? How fast are the aggro decks? And can I beat all these freaking Oasis or Spites or something like that? I would ask myself, do I expect my opponents to be prepared for my deck and well practiced against it? In Kano's case, absolutely not. So tick, that's a good box for me. Even if people understand their game plans into Kano, how likely are they to have hate or tech cards in their sideboard for them? Pretty much zero, right? Because the representation is so low and the narrative around the deck is pretty negative. I would say a good example of this is in Pro Tour 1. There was like a lot of lack. People ended up cutting Arcane Barrier and Spell Void because the decks, I guess the top 3 decks were kind of so powerful, right? Like it felt like everything was a bit razor thin, so you had to get an edge wherever you could, and it was an almost easy choice to be like, yeah, I don't really need that Spell Void. There's and even if you looked at the statistics at the end, I know quite a few Kanos, 2 Kanos made top 8, had a great conversion, but the amount of Kanos that actually showed up, it might have been actually correct to cut the Spell Void, but this is something that we really considered potentially bringing that deck to the tournament. It's like, okay, let's look at all the past lists from this previous data set of tournaments that people have been playing where they've registered lists. How much Spell Void are they playing? And it was almost none, right? How much Arcane Barrier? Like maybe 1. Except for, of course, Tarek Patel's list on Channel Fireball, which always has got max Kano hate. I would ask myself, how many people do I expect to be playing heroes that are actively like really, really bad matchups for me? So an example of this in this meta would be Boost Dash, right? Like Boost Dash just maybe too fast for me. I don't want to be rolling the dice against that deck every time. And also Icelander, right? A good Icelander player can drag me into sort of deep water in the late game, and it's just a really, really tough matchup. And I expect the Icelander players in my local meta to be very well practiced and have a good game plan to me. So that would be, maybe I shouldn't be playing this deck. And then calling back to our previous point, and like we said, our most important point, maybe I should just play Kano regardless because it's cool and I practiced a lot. Yeah, and I feel comfortable on it, right? And I think that that's a perfectly legitimate strategy for a deck to bring to the ProQuest season.
One thing that we didn't touch on, just to end this out, is that we didn't touch on the sort of newness or the unknown. The other thing I think you can potentially gain an advantage for ProQuest Season 3, and maybe going to your next point, Brendan, but is playing something that isn't as well known. There's a lot of new things you could do. We talked about Dorinthia earlier. Maybe you could be playing Saber, Dagger, Dorinthia, right? There's new things you could be doing as well.
Yeah, definitely. So after you've done all this sort of, I don't know, theorizing on the meta, right? You got to pick you got to pick a deck. I would say, and we've said it already, your deck can and likely will change throughout the ProQuest season. So don't sweat it if you're not on the most broken deck ever conceived your first PQ. It's fine, right? Like you can I brought Bravo to like a freaking PTI event. It happens, you live and you learn, you look at the data and you pick good heroes. You don't play heroes over printed. Welcome to Wraith. So, and then to reiterate on that, your experience and reps supersede all of those metagames anyway. So yeah, don't sweat it too much on the first PQ. You gotta let the meta sort of figure itself out. The data will be posted and you'll have so much more to work with on your second, third, fourth tournament. Were you saying something, Hayden? I heard a hate in the back.
Oh, I was just, don't talk about my Welcome to Wraith heroes like that. Don't play a hero from Arcane, right? No. I will say that I think, for a lot of people, the situation might be that you won't change hero for a number of reasons. You might not have access to the cards to do so. You might have, this is the deck that you have, the hero that you play. Maybe you don't want to. You want to play this hero. You want to win. You want to do well with this hero. And all of those things are fine. I think it's still about understanding week to week shifts and trying to do what you can for those. So, you might find after week 1, your hero is not badly positioned, but also not fantastically positioned. But how can you potentially go and look at the list you played and look at maybe it's sideboard packages, maybe you look at a slightly different plan B or, subset of game plans for that. Maybe you even I just change up my blues to some more non-attack actions because Rolton's really powerful in my meta. I don't know. There's things you can definitely do between weeks 1 to 2, weeks 2 to 3 when it comes to picking your deck. And it can just be small tweaks and things like that as well. It doesn't need to be wholesale changes and hero changes because you could be subscribing to the philosophy Brendan just talked about. Play what you know and what you've practiced and take the learnings you've had from... You learn a lot during these events. During one ProQuest, I feel like whenever I play any sort of mid to high level event, that's when I learn the most. You're playing these games, you're playing against people who are also well practiced, who have plans, and you just you play a game against someone who's never played like that before into the deck you're on. You go, wow, I hadn't thought about that plan before. I'm going to go away and think about how I can react to that. And that could mean, shifts in your deck list.
Yeah. Kind of a diversion, but I just want to, there's something you said there where it's you feel, you're talking about how much you improve. I think that time playing these sort of higher stakes tournaments is actually really important to sort of cultivating a sense of comfortability while being in that scenario, right? And I've played seasons like this where I didn't need the PTI, I had the invite, I had the card or the freaking mat, but I kept playing because I wanted to put myself in those tournament-esque or Pro Tour-esque scenarios as much as possible and play the best players. It is absolutely non-zero and a huge advantage if you're walking up to your first Pro Tour. If you've played all these players before, you know what to expect. It's a big deal. So I want to go into, Hayden, you talked about switching cards, right? That's developing your sideboard to an extent. It could affect your main deck as well, but it's important to sort of revisit your perceived metagame analysis in order to develop a sideboard that's prepared to handle what you think will likely show up. I would say that each card you add in your sideboard comes at the cost of not adding a different card that might help you in other matchups, right? So when you're cutting Spell, Void, and Null Rune, you might be helping your matchup against Oldhim, which is potentially the most played deck, but you might have lost 80% edge against the Wizards or something like that. So there's an opportunity cost, right? Your sideboard slots are definitely limited. One thing that I would say when it comes to your sideboard is to practice with it. I would say make sure that the cards you've added for specific matchups are actually effective and worth it. For instance, if you're already 70-30 on a matchup, do you really need to add 3 additional cards to your sideboard slot to go up 75-25? Probably not. And I actually see people do that a lot, and I've done it many times before. I think that a sideboard is something that you can sort of theorize and develop, but you need to put it out in the wild and test it and put it out into practice to see if it actually holds up, because I find most of the time it actually doesn't. So playing practice games into the expected metagame to see if you're missing any tech cards that could really help you, super important. And like I said, I found that this process in my experience has led to me switching cards in my sideboard pretty much 100% of the time.
Yeah, if I had 2 sort of big learnings from this process, of playing week to week ProQuests or sort of trying to grind out that invite, get to that ProQuest win. One of the things that can be really detrimental is like over sideboarding, is going away after. So maybe you play your first week of ProQuest and you take a hard loss, which knocks you out of top 8 contention to, let's say it's deck X. It doesn't really matter what it is. And you go away and all you're thinking about is that loss. And then you overcorrect your sideboard for that. You start to actually hurt your main core game plan. And you talked about like moving from a 70-30 to a 75-25, if you want to give arbitrary numbers to stuff, whatever. But what you might also be doing in that instance is actually taking away just what your deck does well, or taking options from your potential sideboard package that are really good into all the aggressive decks in the meta. All of a sudden, I'm like over sideboarding for slower control decks like Ultim, and I've taken away a big part of my core package against aggressive decks, which now makes my matchup to that just infinitely harder. There is this like syndrome of over sideboarding, I think, and you make a great point, Brendan. Like, get the reps and practice it. I would hesitate to make a lot of wholesale changes to things without practicing them. I might change one or two things to tweak like ratios, numbers, the ability to see a particular sort of effect. So maybe there's a particular effect I want to see, and I have 3 ways to have that in my deck. Like, let's use, why don't we use Rhino as an example? Maybe I feel like I need more Intimidate in my deck for control matchups, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to play 3 Alpha Rampage in my sort of quote unquote sideboard now, which I didn't last week because I want access to that. But then also at the same time, like, what's coming out at the expense of that? I think that's really important I've definitely had that hurt me a lot, sort of making incorrect changes.
Do I have a fucking story for this? So, on the eve of the first U.S. National Championship, Zach Bunn and I revisit our Earth Briar deck, which I think Zach Bunn is a little bit famous for kind of bro sciencing his deck. Maybe a Yellow Whisper of the Oracle sneaks his way in there somehow. But me and Zach, we sat down the night before and we're like, we're going to pull out the Excel sheet. We're going to math this. We're going to do this the big boy way, right? And we get all of our ratios. We're doing all of our math. We're adjusting some cards here and there, adjusting some blues, adjusting like, attack actions versus non-attack actions because it's a Runeblade deck. We get to the tournament, on the national, the round one of the, after the draft at Nationals. We both come up to each other and I was like, dude, what the hell? Like, what abomination is in my freaking backpack right now? Because that felt like crap. We didn't practice it. We switched the deck. We did what made sense in theory from a math basis, from ratios, and it just didn't work out. And it was absolute garbage.
Yep. It happens. Theory is only leads you to theory is fantastic in Flesh and Blood. It corner cuts you. It saves a lot of time, and it gets you to points where you can start to even goldfish plus test and practice. But you can quickly find that some of these golden ratios and things you think should be right in cards that in theory should be fantastic kind of suck in the way that the games play out because of not just what you do but also what your opponents do. So yeah, good example. The last thing, the last kind of one I had was just the kind of analysis of it. Like, I think when you don't get too focused on small parts of the meta, like the Kano example is a good one, right? It's like, okay, if your local meta has wizards in it and you can expect that, then be prepared for it. But if it's like, okay, I'm devoting 4 of my really important 15 potential sideboard slots, or I like to look at it as an 80, 4 of my 80 cards to a matchup that might be 1 in 50 players at the event, is that the best use of your cards? Maybe it is if you have free slots, right? Or you think it's going to be more than 1 in 50, it's going to be more like 5 or 10 in 50, 5-10%, then that makes sense. But I do think, especially at ProQuest, I see people often over-focus on certain matchups to their detriment, especially when they probably could just take 5 minutes, sit down with that pen and paper and work out a bit about what the meta is probably going to be.
Yeah, and finally, exciting, some logistics. Sleeve your deck in new sleeves. Print out multiple copies of your deck list, and for God's sake, write down your sideboard plan. People who don't do that are freaking psychopaths. Just write it down. It makes it so much easier. But yeah, come prepared. It helps. And the less you have to think outside of just actually playing the game, the better. So we'll go to step 3 here, which is go ahead.
I want to ask a question. First of all, I've never seen a friend of the show, Dan Mackay, ever write down a sideboard plan. He refuses to. And I've seen him make multiple sideboarding errors because of it, but he'll never change. Why sleeve your deck in new sleeves, and why print out multiple copies of a deck list, Brendan?
So print out multiple copies of a deck list so you don't, I don't know, sometimes those things, like you can lose them. I've had to give out 2 before. I can't remember why. And if there's anything I despise in this life, it's writing down with a pen and paper all the cards in my deck. I hate doing that. So I print out like 10 copies. And then you sleeve new sleeves. I mean, you should be doing that before every single tournament. It's just best practice. I mean, obviously you can check your current sleeve to make sure they're okay, but like, it's just, that's what I feel like that's part of professionalism in card games, is like, just make sure all of your stuff is good and ready to go, and just go through this ritual. And then all you have to do on the day of the tournament is just focus on actually playing the game.
I think it's reasonable advice. I will usually use new sleeves. I will never print out 2 copies of a deck list though. But I think if you are prone to misplacing,
yeah.
And if you want to use that deck list again, I often just like print it out and then I'll just like change it, just like scribble it out and change it.
I got a manila folder and everything.
Of course you do.
So step 3, the tournament and how to win. So expect 5+ rounds or to cut the top 8. But this is based on attendance. It's probably variable by location. But for example, where I'm located, you would expect over 5 rounds every single time with the cut to top 8. These tournaments can be extremely long. The time allocated to a class constructed round will be the same, but that does not mean that 5 rounds at one store will be 5 rounds at another store. Some tournaments can go exceedingly long because of delays and just all kinds of things. So just be prepared for the long haul with some of these things.
Mirrors, ultimate mirrors.
Yeah, or like, somebody's like, hey, how about a 3-hour lunch break, 2 rounds in? You're like, what? By the way, we don't have bathrooms now. Okay, so let's play like you practice and understand your game plans. Try not to tilt off a loss. These tournaments are usually long, so I think that 1 loss is usually not the end of the world. Maybe it's the round 1 loss and there's like a smaller tournament.
You're fine.
Yeah, just get over it. Anyway, try not to tilt, because I know for some of the ProQuest here in Texas, they can be quite large, and like, you're in for the long haul. And I've taken round 1 losses. I took a freaking round 1 loss at the PTI event at SCG, and because I was freaking late, so I just got an immediate loss, and then went through to close out that tournament. So yeah, just don't let it tilt you, and you can play from behind, and just win out anyway. I would say this is particularly important for ProQuest. I would say look at what other people are playing and make note of this. Make note of this info to help you pick your deck or cards in your deck, your sideboard for the next tournament. I think like we've talked about, the macro meta changes week by week, most likely, unless it's Starvo, based on the LSS meta breakdown articles, but also your local meta might favor something different from the norm. I have a few anecdotes here. So in Texas, if Prism is legal, expect a ridiculous amount of Prism, even if it's like the worst positioned deck in the game. Tons of people are going to be playing Prism. And also, back in the Starvo days, back in Starvo ProQuest days, Starvo was one of the least played decks at like the Dallas ProQuest. Like, one of the least played decks. Everybody was complaining about it, and it was OP, but they all freaking brought Prism. They all brought Prism. They all brought Prism and Chain. That was it.
Well, they wanted to beat it.
Yeah.
It's the making a note thing, it's relevant for ProQuest because you're going to play against the same players like we talked about at the start. People are going to travel within local radiuses. People are going to probably play the same sort of things. You can also, people call it scouting, whatever you want to call it, but just walk around and look at what people are playing. We're in a new era of Flesh and Blood where when you sit down across from a hero, you don't necessarily know what strategy they're going to play into. And you also might be playing a deck that's susceptible to fatigue, for instance. So any just sort of information you can gather at an event that's 30, 40 players, whatever it is, can be really huge for you if you're trying to win this kind of event and punch your ticket to the Pro Tour. I really recommend it. It doesn't take much. You finish a round, you grab a snack or drink out of your bag, whatever, and just walk around the tables around you that you potentially could be playing against. Just have a look at the games. What strategy is that Katsu playing? What is that Ultim doing? Are they playing Glacial Footsteps and stuff, or are they playing a lot more defense reactions? You can easily kind of have this information, and it's just going to give you an understanding. It might not change your sideboard plan into the matchup, but it might change how you want to play and just what cards to expect during the matchup. And while it might only give you, if you're trying to put numerical numbers on it, a 5-10% edge maximum, I think at a ProQuest level where people are, it's really cutthroat, right? Everyone wants to punch their ticket to the PT. I think you take what the edges you can get, obviously in the rules of the game.
Yeah,
point that out,
I just
please.
I like it for sort of understand, because we talk about Legend Story, they release these articles, they tell you what the meta kind of looks like around the world. Dude, And I don't know if it's my region, it's probably everybody's region, but my region will sometimes behave so freaking atypically to that data that it's like almost useless to me. So I like to understand like what people are on. So it's like when I'm going to like revisit my deck, maybe tweak a few cards on my sideboard for the next week's tournament because I got dunked on by a freaking Dash or something the tournament before. I'm like, oh, well, Dash might be the best deck, but 70% of these people are on Lexi for some reason, so I should probably be prepared for that. So I just want to, Hayden accused me of not being a ProQuest hero, but
I didn't accuse you.
Back in my day, there was the first Road to National season. I won 5 in a row. So just gonna talk a little bit about like my approach, what we did, and why it worked. So I was playing Chain. Probably one of the most overpowered decks ever, but I was very comfortable in the deck. I was well practiced. I feel like our testing team had developed that deck. It was just, that was my pet deck anyway. A common strat into that Chain deck was to fatigue it. People thought that deck was sort of weak against fatigue, and they would bring fatigue to target Chain, but our Chain deck was designed to beat it, and it was our best matchup, so it was a great scenario to be in. Public opinion was very split at the time, with Chain being the quote-unquote best deck. Some people would say it was, but then everybody brought Prism anyway, even though the conversion was terrible. And I would say out of ProQuest, you're not unlikely, we talked about this actually in the last week's Patreon pod, but out of ProQuest, you're not unlikely to play the same person twice, once in Swiss, once in top 8. And as a result, the information on what cards you should sideboard against them is really important actually in top 8. This happened to me at a local ProQuest, or local Road to Nationals, where I played a Chain in Swiss. I lost, but then saw that he was playing like 9 Flock of the Featherwalkers, and I knew that he was going to be number 1 seed, so he was going to put me going second, and I could reasonably add a lot of Command & Conquers in my deck, more than I usually would, because Flock of the Featherwalkers on the play incentivizes you to Arsenal, but even after being on the play, through subsequent turns, that card is incentivizing you to play the 5-card hand, play the Arsenal, just because of the way Flock of the Featherwalker works as like a combat chain mender, where you reveal the card and then that goes in your arsenal. So my CNC stock went way up. So I put in 3 CNCs and ended up winning me the game. And yeah, finally, Arsenal Pass probably sounds like a broken record at this point. But when it comes to playing these ProQuests, you should most likely be prepared for a long day, sort out food, stay hydrated, and get plenty of sleep. The facilities at ProQuest can sometimes not be great, and the quality can vary pretty drastically from store to store, especially when it comes to food. So best to just sort it out before. And my mantra is, when I'm at a tournament like a ProQuest, the only thing I want to think about is playing the game, nothing else.
All right. Yep. Good calls. I want to just round off, because I know you're going to move through to a little bit about what to expect for ProQuest Season 3 and talk a bit about the meta and how to start thinking about ProQuest already, even though we're still 6-7 weeks out. But I want to just share some of my kind of learnings from ProQuest Season 1 and Season 2. So ProQuest Season 1, I think I played 4 or so ProQuests, and then ProQuest Season 2, I played 2 ProQuests. And I took a lot of learnings away from ProQuest Season 2, I think. I played 2 ProQuests, the first week and the second week. The first week I showed up with a Dash deck that I wanted to play because I didn't play it at PT1. I felt really confident about how strong it was. I didn't really think much about the meta. I didn't really think much about my sideboard choices. I just chose the deck that I thought was powerful, and I was like, I think I can do well with this. Ended up doing not very well, and one of the kind of things for me was like, I think I was out by like round 3 or something, but I played the rest of the Swiss rounds out, and I think that's important if you're wanting to if you want to play at this level and get the most experience possible. I think getting involved and continuing to play these events play each of the rounds is really important. You can get a lot from it. You might not be live for top 8, but you are going to play rounds against competitive players who want to be doing the same thing that you're doing, playing in these ProQuests. You're going to get exposure to, you're already at the event. Why not play out, and learn more about the deck list you're playing, learn more about the matchups against people who are playing it differently to maybe how people in your testing group or your friends play it. I think that's really important. So that's something that I definitely like to do, even if I'm out, just play. And I think the other thing, so to like the second week of the ProQuest season, one of the things I did is a little bit of the advice we talked about earlier. I sat down and tried to work out based on week 1 what sort of decks I thought people were going to play. And I thought that there was kind of this gap in the meta for a bit more of an aggressive sort of Runeblade deck. I ended up playing Belittle Viscerai, and I think you can sort of pinpoint a bit more about the metagame, like you're saying, local metagame. And you can take a deck that's not necessarily the known or the thing that people are expecting if you have an idea of how you're going to play into all these matchups. So I think there's a lot of learnings you can take across week 1, week 2. But yeah, big takeaways from me over the last few ProQuest seasons have been like, just play out your games, learn as much as possible, try and get prepared for the next week, and be really focused on why you're making changes or why you're choosing a deck. Because you want to win the event. Like top 8 in the event is a great start, but if you're choosing a deck to, top 8, you want to have every sort of little edge possible and understand what you're probably going to play against, not just in Swiss, but in top 8 as well. So it's like, maybe Ultim's going to be the most played deck, but like maybe that the 3 or 4 best players in your meta are playing Icelander. Like I'm more interested in that situation if I want to win the ProQuest to be really prepared for Icelander, even over and above Ultim, even if double the amount of people are going to play it. Yes, I need to be able to beat those Ultims to get through to top 8, but I definitely need to be able to beat those Icelanders to win the event.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and on to our addendum section. Tips for the current class constructed meta for the upcoming ProQuest season. So Hayden, I have a few questions for you. Just hang with me while I ask them. What are your meta expectations, your thoughts on the quote-unquote best deck, and your personal strategy for this upcoming ProQuest season? You're good to go?
Yep, good to go. So I think I said at the top of the show, it's maybe a bit early to tell right now in terms of meta expectations of where we're going to land. But I think we're already starting to see a few things. I expect Dash to be around. I think at the moment people are cool on some of what have been the best decks in the format traditionally. So Icelander, Fi. Icelander people are talking about still being the best deck. I'm seeing that discourse around. People are saying, Icelander's still the best deck. But Fi is something I'm not seeing people talk about. Fi hasn't changed much. It's still really powerful. And going into the World Championship, Brendan, like the debate was around best deck, but from what I'd seen, people thought that Fi was still the default best deck. I don't think that's changed, right? So that's kind of my meta expectations right now, is that we're going to see people, yes, play the newness, play the exciting sort of things. You'll see a few people play Arachne, but once people get into some serious testing, and people who want to win a ProQuest will do at least some sort of amount of testing into what they think are the better decks. I think you'll see people come back to a bit more Icelander, a bit more Fire, a bit more Ultim and Briar. I think it's going to be pretty diverse in the first couple of weeks, unless we see a bit more sort of community discourse come closer together about what these best decks actually look like. So maybe it's like, Fire and Icelander are actually just too good for Dash, and that becomes a sort of sentiment 2 weeks out from the event. Not saying that's true, but just saying that could become a sentiment. So I would say, like, keep finger on the pulse. I think we'll definitely see some discourse and sentiment. But at local events, you tend to get meta breakers, and like you're saying, Brendan, the meta might not look like what you expect it to globally. So I think we'll see some changes, and I think it's important probably to know a bit about what your local meta's looking to do. Those will start to evolve. My thoughts on best deck, I think it's interesting. I think Dash is really, really powerful. I've been playing a bit of Dash recently. I think Hanabi Blaster is a crazy good card. I don't think fatigue is really an issue for you anymore with Hanabi Blaster. I think with those and being able to set up items, it's really powerful. What is more scary is active disruption. Things like Lexi potentially, even Icelander, depending on what cards you can fit into your 80 cards, still can be a tough prospect. And just because also the Hanabi Blaster plan isn't particularly good against Icelander, I don't think. And then Fi. I think Fi is just really, really good still. So those are probably the top 3 decks that I'd have my eye on heading into the ProQuest season.
Yeah, I'd honestly be willing to gamble that at most ProQuest in the United States, I think there's going to be an absolute dump truck load of Dash at the first ProQuest tournament, to be honest. Like a sort of fresh, hyper-aggressive deck that's pretty straightforward, that now kind of beats fatigue with just this like one weapon slot upgrade. Seems like where you want to be. It's like, okay, the thing I'm worried about if I'm playing Dash potentially, right, is things like Ice Lexi and Icelander, decks that I don't think are played on the regional level very much. So like I think there's a very strong argument to be playing Dash in the first ProQuest, and an even better argument to try and counter it if you have a deck that's reasonably well rounded into the rest of the meta.
Yeah, I would just say don't forget about, like I said, Icelander or Fire. I think people are still going to shop at those decks. The one thing I will counter on that is I don't think Dash is an easy deck to play. I think it's probably one of the hardest decks to play in what this meta is shaping up to look like. For me, it's not particularly easy to play. I think there's a lot of different avenues you can go down. I think building the deck itself is really difficult. Like what your main deck plan looks like versus potential plans for like things like Dromai, things like Icelander. Do you have a pistol plan in the sideboard? Do you have access to defense reactions or proactive Ultim decks? Like there's so many different ways to play it, and playing around fatigue with Hanabi Blaster, I wouldn't say it's easy. I think you've got a fantastic tool to do it now in the form of Hanabi Blaster, but I don't think it's necessarily straightforward. And I actually think there's quite a reasonable amount of decisions around how you use your cards like Spark of Genius, how you set up your counters and use them on Hanabi Blaster, how you utilize maximum velocity turns, how you utilize and get your items into play. I actually think there's quite a lot of play to the deck, and I actually think it's one of the harder decks in the format to play, which is really interesting. So, yeah.
Sweet. Well, that wraps up episode 86 of Arsenal Pass, which was recorded live on Twitter Spaces. It will not be recorded for future listening on Twitter Spaces. We will upload it to YouTube and all podcast platforms like usual on Thursday. So if you're listening to this and you didn't hear it live, that's probably where you're getting it from. But just to let you know, we might do this again in the future. We'll look at the data, look at what people say. If it's good and the technical difficulties aren't too bad, we'll go ahead and do it again. Just want to say, let us know your thoughts. If you're listening on YouTube, let us know your thoughts in the comment below, right? Like, I'm interested to hear what you are planning to play for the upcoming ProQuest season. What do you think is the best deck? How has Dynasty affected the meta? Is the meta maybe going to look kind of the same way it did back in Worlds, or are there some new dark horses that are going to come into their own and potentially dominate this new season of Classic Constructed? While you're down there, of course, headbutt that like and smack that subscribe for us. It does help us a lot. I just want to say, closing as well, the Austin Marathon, February 19th, Fab Fitness Challenge. Would love to have you out there. It's going to be a great time. We're all going to meet up. It's an awesome event. The team name, if you do decide to sign up, is Arsenal Pass. No surprise there. And if you're not interested in running a marathon, which probably applies to most people, there's also a half marathon and 5K available. So just get out there, come hang out with all of us. And of course, more news to come on that end. But just want to give everybody a heads up because these things do take a long time to train for. So if you're planning on coming, get out there and be prepared. Hayden, do you have any upcoming videos or announcements?
Yeah, we're going to open up for those in the live, we are going to open up the spaces in a second for a Q&A. But I do just want to, before we close out, we've got these LSS fabtcg.com YouTube videos are up. The gameplays we've done for the Blitz gameplay series, and go check those out. Please go and check them out for us. Help us with the videos we've put up there. Show LSS that these things are wanted. I think it's great to have gameplay, I think. And other than that, I mean, we're both obviously on Twitter at BrendanAPG and Fian_Dale, and we will have some more Flesh and Blood content up on the YouTube page over this sort of downtime period. We have more time to make content, which is great. So December, January in particular, look out for some more videos. But with that, Brendan, we're going to sign up for the pod and then throw over to the Twitter Q&A, I think.
Yep. See y'all next week. Our Q&A time.